Well, hey guys, it's Viejo here, and we're right at the end of February in 2025. Time's flying, huh? Hey, we all know that our reloading processes don't always go just right. Sometimes we have issues with our cases getting bashed up, or our powder doesn't get dispensed properly, or we run across bullets that are not up to par. Lots of things can happen, get in the way of a nice, smooth reloading process. What I'm going to talk about today is some strategies that I have for dealing with improperly seated primers, and that those can happen for a number of different reasons that we'll get into. And this is going to be mostly related to handgun stuff, but you may be able to use some of this in your rifle situations as well. And the other day, our friend Fortune Cookie 45 LC had published a video. I think it was on his Patreon channel. And he had a bad primer, and he was talking a little bit about that. And I said, hey, I have some video footage. I had done a video, or had started one anyway, some time ago, about dealing with that, and that I should get that posted. And I started looking at that video, and it was old, and I didn't like some of it. So I decided to redo it. So that's what we're up to today. We're going to talk about strategies for dealing with primers that are improperly seated, and that we're going to talk about three different situations. We got a proud primer, we got one that's upside down, and one that's in sideways. Okay, and in a couple of those cases, you may not be able to get your cartridge out of the shell holder. So what do we do about that? And how can we deal with it? The primers that you're going to see are all dead primers. Okay, I'm not doing the video with live primers at all. But we do want to emphasize that whenever you're dealing with these primers, guys, these are very dangerous little pills, these primers. If you've never seen one go off, outside of the firing line, they go off like a firecracker. There's a lot of force in those guys. And that's why we have metal shrouds around our primer magazines in our progressive presses and so forth, okay, or even in our turrets that have like the Redding, that have a automatic primer feed type situation. They're nasty. So when we're dealing with pushing out primers, if they're still alive, eye protection all the time. Keep your face out, away from the danger zone there for sure. So keep that in mind, that any of these steps, okay, we want to emphasize, be safe about it. Don't get in a hurry about punching these primers out, and it's easy does it, okay? Okay, let's get into this. Let's take a look at three different kinds of bad primer seats. So I'm going to be talking primarily about these three types of primer issues. Remember, these are all dead primers that I'm working with for demonstration purposes today. You guys pretend that they're live, and we have eye protection on all the time when we're dealing with these guys, all right? So we got the proud primer here, and this could have been one that you got back from the range and had a primer sticking up like that, couldn't get it into the shell holder to deprime it. So we'll talk about a way to deal with that. We got the upside down inverted primer, okay? And we've got one that went in sideways that won't come out of the shell holder. All right, so how we deal with those depends a little bit on what stage of the reloading process we discovered the problem. If, again, if we're working on a single stage press, it's probably going to happen right at the sizing station if you are priming on the same step as sizing, okay? Because as soon as you try to take that cartridge out of there, if it's a proud primer or even one that's in sideways and didn't go all the way in, then you're going to notice it there because it won't come out of the shell holder, okay? Or you pull it out and you look at it and you go, oh, it's upside down, okay? That's the best place that you've got going for you to discover a poorly seated primer. As we get further down the line, it gets more and more problematic. when we get to the seeding stage. Now we got to get rid of a bullet before we can get rid of the primer, and so that involves, you know, even more of a setup. Okay, so let's kind of get into this, and we'll start our discussion as though we had just discovered a problem at our resizing stage if we are priming, you know, after sizing, which a lot of guys do. So let's talk about this one first, okay? Okay, so let's say now that we're at this stage here, we're at our sizing station, and we get a primer situation here. Okay, there's a primer in the pocket. Maybe it's one that we have just tried to seat and it didn't seat all the way, or maybe we are sizing and depriming and the primer wouldn't come out. Whatever the story is there, if this guy won't come out of there, I recommend that we get in here and pull that whole guy out of there, shell holder and all, and take a look down in there and see what's going on. Okay, remember that could be a live primer, but we're using dead primers for demonstration purposes today. And we see that when, yeah, it's not all the way in or it's not all the way out. Okay, you can put this guy back in there, of course. I'm sorry, hit my camera. And if we're on our depriming stage, then we can just go ahead and deprime it the rest of the way. It should come out unless you've done something like broken your deprime pin, and that's why it didn't get pushed all the way out. Okay, but normally easing it back up in there, push that primer the rest of the way out, and you're fine, and that should make sense. So maybe we have just started to prime this, and it wouldn't go. We got in there and pushed and pushed, and you know, and it didn't seem like it wanted to seat all the way. We tried to get it out of there, and the whole case won't come out. You got a couple of options. One is sacrifice that primer, go ahead and push it the rest of the way out. Again, easy does it. Okay, when we're going up here, we go slow and easy when we're working with these live primers. All right, and you may end up having to sacrifice that primer. Then you take a look at your pocket and you go, oh, it's an S&B pocket, you know, case there, and they're tight, and maybe it's turned out to be a crimped primer pocket, and that's why the primer wouldn't go in all the way. And you may need to go swage that primer pocket or cut it, you know, ream it, however you want to take care of that, and then come back and reprime. Okay. But suppose we get this guy, you know, we get in here and we wiggle it and we get it, you know, we get it out of the case. You know, suppose we're in here and we're able to wiggle this thing around and we get it out of the shell holder. And we look at it and go, proud primer, but now it won't go back in. So now what? So let's say we've got this guy and somehow we caught this at sizing. Either it's a case that we just brought back from the range and it won't go into the shell holder, or somehow you had sized and primed and got it out of the shell holder, but you can't get it back in there. So what I like to do is go ahead and find a shell holder for another caliber that's large enough for that case to sit down on top of it without worrying about whether or not the shell holder is going to grab it. Okay, because we don't want it to grab it. Otherwise, if that was small enough for that to slide in this way, then we wouldn't be able to get it in with that fat primer sticking out of there. So what I'm going to do here then is come over to my depriming station and snap that guy in there, and then push this up gently. And sometimes you got to kind of wiggle that around a little bit, but there it went. Okay, and we got that guy popped right on out of there. Okay, handy to have this universal depriming die from Lee for lots of jobs, including one like this, because you can't run this back up into a 45 ACP sizer and punch it out. What'll happen is that you'll run that case all the way up in there and it'll stick. The case will stick and the primer will come out, but you won't get the case out. Okay, because that 45 ACP sizer will grab it. And since that shell holder, okay, won't hold on to the case, it won't hold on to it when you try to pull the case back out either. So in situations like, say this was a 9mm case, you might be able to make this same scenario work with a 45 ACP sizing die on the 9mm case, and stick your 9mm case onto a 45 ACP shell holder like that, because the 45 ACP sizing die won't hold the case. It'll fall out like you want it to. Okay, but I recommend a universal depriming die. They're just handy to have. You know, I mean, you don't have to have a separate press. You can take your sizing die back out of your other single stage press or whatever, and stick this die in there and go ahead and get the job done. Okay, here's another scenario that you could possibly use on the same type of situation where we got that proud primer. If you've got an RCBS or other type of hand primer that's got universal jaws in it, okay? These guys. So what we can do with this is, this case is not going to want to go directly in there either. Okay? It's not going to want to go, but we can catch one edge of it. And I don't know if I can do this and have the camera going at the same time with enough light to show you or not. Let's see, let me move this camera a little bit. Okay, what I'm going to do is catch one of the jaws, push it over as far as I can. Then I'm just going to take a little flat blade screwdriver and get it in here and shove that other jaw over. And that will let me get my case down in there. Okay, now I can simply get in there and seat that primer back up in there the way it's supposed to be. And if it was a dead primer, now I can go to my sizing die and punch it out as normal. Or if it was still a good primer, we're good to go now. Okay. Boy, my camera didn't want to focus, does it? Okay, there it is. Okay, so that's another possibility if you've got one of these guys on hand. And again, that works because of this universal jaw. I can catch one and simply push the other one out of the way. And, you know, it kind of takes 2.5 hands to get that done, but it's a technique that I've used in the past, and it does work. Now, keep in mind that this method here is something that you might do if you had a dead primer, you know, on a case that had already been fired and it just was sticking proud and you couldn't get it into your regular shell holder. So we're going to go back and just seat that dead primer all the way up into the case and then go put it to our regular press and punch it out. Okay. If you were over here and you were having trouble, like we were talking about, maybe you had a tight primer pocket, or you suspected that it was a crimped primer and it didn't want to go in all the way, that's not something that you would try to remedy like this, because if you had trouble on your main press, you're going to have trouble with it over here too, and you're going to end up with probably a more serious issue, you know, breaking this thing, or, you know, breaking the jaws here, or, you know, really mashing up that primer in there more than it should be. So in that situation, we want to do something different. Okay, now this one is fairly straightforward on what you can do with this. Okay, again, provided that we've caught it at the sizing stage and we pull that out and we look and, oh man, it's upside down. Okay, all we're going to do here is go right back to our press, okay, and run that right back up into our sizing die. Okay, and again, ease these guys out, guys. You don't want to get in here and slam that depriming pin down into the primer, whether it's inverted or right side up. Okay, you're going to do this with your goggles on, okay, or eye protection of one form or the other, and ease that primer out of there. Like that, okay? Very, very simple, okay? And personally, I don't reuse the primers, okay? Once it's out of there and I've, mashed that anvil down towards the cup, and I don't want to use a primer again. I'll sacrifice it. Okay, and this one, we get one in there and it won't come out of the shell holder. We've just sized and seated a primer in there and the case won't come out. So we pull the whole thing out there, case and all, and we look down in there and lo and behold, we've got a sideways primer in there. Let me get you some better light. You see that guy down in there? Okay, we're not going to save that primer. We're just going to go right back over here to the press. And in the same way, we're just going to ease that primer right on out of there. Okay, nice and easy like that. Okay, so what do you do with those primers? They're live primers. You don't want to reuse them again. I've got a little jar here with just some WD-40 in it. And I let them soak in there for a week or two. Usually it's longer than that because I forget about them. And then the WD-40, the word is, will denature the priming compound and you can just toss them. So I just keep this little guy up on the shelf, and I only got one in there now, but. Okay, now if you're on a single stage press and now we're at the expansion stage, it's most likely you will have discovered any primer issues by the end of having all of your cases sized and deprimed and or reprimed, okay? Unless it is the very last case that you have sized and deprimed and reprimed and you left it there, came up, swapped out your size die for your expander die, and then get in here and try to take that one out. Okay, well, we are describing a number of different ways that you can deal with that. But the best thing in that case is, and the easiest, is probably go, okay, you pull this out, take a look, there's a proud primer. You haven't done anything yet. Okay, this would have been the first one that you're going to be expanding. Go ahead, take that expander out, put your sizer back in, and punch that primer out or reseat it as described. Okay, but if we're on a turret press like the Lee 4-hole Classic, the situation is going to be easier. And if we discover an improper primer here at the expander phase, we simply rotate back to our sizing step and go ahead and get that primer out of there as described before. Nice and safe, right? Eye protection, slow and easy. Okay, once we've gotten past, the expansion stage, if we're on a turret press or a progressive press, okay, like the 550, for example, you, again, may not notice that issue right away. With something like my Dillon 550, if that primer didn't seat properly at station number 1, you're going to know it right away as soon as you try to advance that shell plate, because the primer is going to drag, and you'll know it. You'll feel it there, okay? And you've got to deal with it. So I've had situations where I had to go in, okay, I got to take the shell plate out to get at that guy, to get it loose, okay? So, but a lot of guys aren't using that. You're using a turret press like the Redding or the Lee or one of those guys, an RCBS turret, okay? And that's easier to deal with there. Okay. So let's talk about that once we get to the stage where we have got a bullet seated. Again, not likely to have happened to, for you to get that far, except in the case where you've got an upside down primer. Okay, we get that far, and you've probably gone all the way and actually, crimped that. Well, maybe you're at the seating stage, you pull it out, oh man, it's upside down. Again, if it were me, I would set that one aside, set the whole cartridge aside and come back to it later. and work with it. But we can get that bullet out of there and then deal with the primer, okay, in one of our ways that we've talked about. Your kinetic hammer, okay, or your collet style bullet puller, depending on what kind of bullet it is, okay, will come in very handy there. Okay, what if we've gotten all this way and hadn't noticed this because we're on a turret press? Okay, and all we've done is advance the turret. We haven't had to remove the shell holder till we get to this point, and we want to check. Oh man, it won't come out of there. All right. So what do we do now? Well, a couple of things. One is you can just leave it there and take out your cedar die and put your bullet pulling die, your collet style in there. Bullet puller like from RCBS or Hornady or whichever, and go ahead and pull that bullet. If it's a powder-coated bullet, those collet-style pullers don't work very well. The powder coat's too slick, and the collets won't grab. So now what are you up to? Well, we can use our kinetic hammers, and what you do here is we're going to go ahead and take the bullet-holding collets out of there and go ahead and pull the entire shell holder out, and we're going to use that as our collet right in there like that. Okay, go ahead and put our cap on. Okay, good and tight, and go ahead and give it the 40 whacks over on your piece of wood or anvil or whatever you're gonna, whatever you normally do with your kinetic hammer style, and take that bullet. Okay, just like this. And if we haven't crimped this guy yet, it'll come out of there with just 1 or 2 whacks, most likely. Okay. If we had already crimped this before we discovered it, again, it would likely be that turret press situation, okay? Because otherwise you would have, if you're working on a single stage press, you'd have probably figured this out right at the either the sizing step or the expander step. Okay, but if you've already crimped this, okay, you went you seated your bullet all the while that primer was sticking up proud and you didn't know it till after you got it crimped, then you're going to take a lot more hits over here to get that guy out. Okay, once we get the bullet out, dump the powder out. Okay, we can come back to our press, and if we're on a turret, we just rotate back around to our sizing station and get up in there and resize and punch the primer out again. Safety first, eye protection. We don't want to hang on to the handles on these presses, real tightly. If that primer decides to ignite, you can get a pretty good, blast up on that handle. So ease them out, nice and slow, okay? Thusly. Okay, and there came my primer, hit me right in the belly button. Okay, and again, if it were me and that was a live primer, I would stick in the WD-40 and not use it. But that's just me. All right. So now we're good to go with that case. It's just a matter of starting all over again. Okay, so now you've got the bullet out of there. The case is still, stuck in the shell holder. So we just come back over to our press, put it back in there. Swap out your cedar die for a sizing die or universal decapper and go ahead and punch that primer out of there properly. If it's a live primer, easy does it. Nice and easy. Okay, slowly. Eye protection, right? And there she goes. Okay, if you've got another press that you can do your decapping on, you can take this whole thing, shell holder and all, stick it in that press. If you got a breech lock type press or the Hornady lock and load system, those, die swaps are easy to do there. You can just swap in and out with your cedar die and your sizer die. And in that scenario where we didn't catch this until the seating step, or worse, the crimp step, and we're working on a single stage, and that's not real likely that you would have gotten that far on a single stage without knowing that primer was sticking out. But it could happen, you know, if you had left that case in there and changed the die to a different one and then ran that same case back in there right away. But you would think that at least you would have pulled that out to put powder in it, and you would have noticed it then. But if that were to happen and you're on your single stage, then you got to pull your seating die out and put your sizer back in there, because your shell holder is captured. Now, if you have another shell holder for the caliber, you can take that out of there and set it aside and come back to it later after you finish the rest of your run. Okay, not a bad idea. I have a set of these Lee universal shell holders. Pretty much always one that's going to work for me, and so I could simply come over here, pull this guy out, set it aside, grab an appropriate one out of here, and keep going. Okay, so that's an option. And then you come back later at the end of the run, take your last die out here, put your seater back or your sizer back in there, and get rid of that primer. Then if we catch the bad primer at the expansion stage, if we're on a turret, we just turn our turret back to the sizing die and ease the primer out, as we saw here a minute ago. Again, emphasizing safety first, iPro, okay, going slow and so forth. That's not going to be a problem. If we're on a single stage though, and we are we've already, you know, primed everything, and we've already got it expanded, and we look at it and it won't come out of the shell holder. What are you going to do? You got to take that expander die out and put your sizing die back in. If you're on a turret, no problem, just rotate it back. Okay, but if you're on a single stage, you would have to take that expander die out unless you have a secondary press with a universal depriming die. Okay, so what I would do in that situation, if I had an additional shell holder that'll work for my 45 ACP or whatever caliber, I would just pull that whole thing out of there, case and all, okay, set the whole thing aside and come back and work on that case later. And, you know, put a sizing die in, resize it, poke the primer out, re-expand it, okay, prime it, get my powder in it, seat another bullet, crimp it, okay. You get swapping dies out, so forth. On a turret press, that, you know, not nearly so much of an issue, but that's the way I would handle it. I would, on a single stage press, I would just hold that one till the end, okay, and then come back and work with it using one of the methods that we're talking about. Okay. All right, guys, there you go. Just a few tips on ways that I deal with a badly seated primer. For whatever reasons, maybe, you know, I've caught it at various stages of the process. But those are some things that I have found useful on. So I hope you enjoyed that and maybe got something out of it. But from the Viejo bench for now, that's all she wrote.